So before I begin, I want to define the difference between the third world country and a first world country. A third world country is a developing country such as Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And a first world country are developed countries, a developed industrial country, such as the Western Europe and Northern America. So today we'll be responding to my opponent's claim that society suffers little from an increase of secularism. The speaker has two claims. Number one, society can function without a religious-based moral code, and number two, that a rising secularism can function without a religious-based moral. A rising secularism has little negative effect on the quality of life. I claim that her argument is contradicting. My first point is that the speaker mentions that our society already has moral tendencies due to evolution, and that the moral code isn't needed. She then states that we already have a justice system that acts as the institution to outlaw murder and stealing. Now, according to an article by the Huffington Post, laws against murder and stealing are also found in religious texts. They are basic moral and ethical codes that address issues that are blatantly wrong. Therefore, people do not need a religious moral code, as we have a justice moral code that has been influenced through religion. Therefore, it doesn't support the speaker's claim. The speaker then assumes that there is a correlation between homicide rate and religion. Her source from Nation Master comparing the homicide rates of 203 countries doesn't support her claim, because there's no correlation between the homicide rates and religion in those countries. The speaker becomes biased as she chose the top 3 countries with the highest homicide rates, and then 3 other countries that fall under the lower 33%. And fails to further prove and mention that the top 3 countries are all undeveloped countries, while the lower 32% are developed countries. Therefore, the developed countries have better systems, like healthcare systems. They have better pretty much better services that are offered to them than the undeveloped countries. The speaker then uses evidence from a poll that to prove that the most religious countries are Brazil, India, and Mexico, while the most non-religious are Denmark, Sweden, and Estonia. However, the speaker fails to mention that the same poll was taken in these countries, and mentions that the poorest countries with a GDP of $2,000 or lower have a 95% faith in religion, while the richest countries such as Denmark, Sweden, and Estonia have a GDP of 25,000 or higher and have a 47% faith in religion. Therefore, what is happening is that these people are happy with the amount of money they're making, so there's no need. They claim that there's no need for them to have a religious belief. Furthermore, therefore, because of the percentages in the faith and religion from the poorest and the richest, her assumption that the poorest religious countries have the highest homicide rates is false and doesn't prove her claim. Now, does religion prompt homicide? Her reasoning is wrong, not because of secularism, but because the countries she is comparing are again developed and undeveloped countries. My next point is the student's claim. A rising secularism has little negative effect on the quality of life. Her supporting claim does not support her main claim, and she is reinstating the claim differently, letting the audience falsely believe that it is supporting claim. According to a poll conducted from Psychology Association, results show happiness to be associated with the frequency of attendance at religious services, with denominational preference, and with doctrinal preference. Happiness is also associated with certain religious-related beliefs that the world is evil or good, but not believe in morality, proving that religion, like secularism, has no bad effect on the quality of life. So someone can be secular yet not atheist. Therefore, someone who never attends religious like ceremonies or services, but still believes in a greater good or something, a greater something. So then the speaker fails to cite her source, making her evidence unreliable. However, from the 2018 World Happiness Report, she mentions it doesn't. From the 2018 World Happiness Report, she mentioned doesn't support the speaker's claim. There's no correlation between the happiness of individuals and secularism. Keeping in mind that she had used these previous countries as the richest and the lowest in homicide rates. The World Happiness Report also surveyed the happiness of immigrants. Therefore, the focus is both countries and immigrants. leading the source to be biased. Now, according to the World Economic Forum, the same countries the speaker mentioned as most happy take 4 out of the top 5 spots, not because they are well known to be stable, safe, and socially progressive. So pretty much what it's referring to is that there is no corruption either in these developed countries. Now, in conclusion, the students' argument that society suffers little from an increase of secularism is insufficient and biased, as it can be also drawn from our own beliefs. Thank you.
All right, well, the structural stuff is pretty fine at the beginning of the speech. The definition of a third world versus first world country, I'm kind of wondering why that's going to come up. And then down below, I see, because in essence you're suggesting that there's a bias in the samples that are being used in a couple of the statistical comparisons. So that makes sense. And why it's a separate place, I'm not quite sure. I think I might have waited to have that definition applied when you were making the actual argument. The notion that the argument contradicts itself, I'm not quite clear on why you make that assumption. There is reference to evidence that the advocate uses. You suggest that there's some issue with the laws being found, that you have laws found in religious texts, and there are also laws that are in the secular kind of judicial system. And so the point is what? That both of them have this? I think that was the advocate's point too. The notion that maybe you need it from one over the other, I think would probably be something that would benefit your position, but it's not quite clear what it is you're saying at that point. The homicide rate comparison, I appreciated your attempt to demonstrate that there's a lack of correlation, and this is where your example about developed and undeveloped countries comes into play, and you suggest that there's bias in the selection of the countries that the advocate's using to make their particular point. That I could see, I could understand why that would be the case, and I thought your reasoning was pretty good at that. The notion that happiness is based on income, it sounds like another causality argument suggesting that it's got little to do with secular behavior or beliefs and everything to do with economic security. And by the way, that applies to the argument again, because when we're dealing with developed and undeveloped countries, if the advocate's using undeveloped countries as a way of making inferences, then we're not comparing the things that are the same. They are different as a consequence. On this, I guess it's the second point. We got some more discussion of the happiness polls, and the secular. I appreciate the notion that secular doesn't necessarily mean that they're not an atheist. And then you claim that there's a failure by the advocate to cite their particular sources. That might diminish their credibility if the information was in some way particularly controversial. I'm not sure that you bother to challenge it in any way. It's not. It's something that you can press on, but I'm not sure that it makes a big difference. The notion that there is no correlation between happiness and secularity sounds to me like it's sort of a competing claim that's going on, rejecting the issue that the advocate's talking about and suggesting that it has no impact on people's overall satisfaction with life. And you had a whole bunch of criteria that you kind of dump in at the end: stability, safety, progressive belief systems that seem to reflect what would be seen as desirable or happiness states. And I didn't really get much explanation about how secular behavior or religious behavior affects any of those sorts of things. So I appreciated that you were kind of trying to diminish the correlation that they're drawing, but I'm not sure how that particular point works without a further argument on that, without some additional evidence. I like some of the information that you had. I thought you did a nice job trying to explain things, but sometimes it's a little too complicated. You need a simple declarative sentence on some of these points rather than this long, involved description that's going on. That's easy to read maybe and make sense of when you're reading it, but we're listening to an argument and it needs to be simpler and clearer, more direct. All right, thank you.